Hi there. I wanted to share with you an incredible experience that I've had where I'm at a course, a 1 week course with Thomas Hubel's Timeless Wisdom Training. And in a nutshell, before I go into the details, I uncovered a capital T childhood trauma, two major ones, that I now realize explains the narrative of so much of my life. And I also experienced the deepest peace I have ever known in my life a day and a half later. So I'm going to share with you what transpired and what's happened since. It's been so incredibly profound. So I met, as I mentioned, Thomas Hubel's Timeless Wisdom Training. It's a 2-year training program, and there's coaches and therapists and healers and individuals that are looking to tap into collective healing. So moving into group coherence and leveraging the collective for healing purposes. So every person that heals and grounds their trauma or their patterns becomes part of the healing current, and it becomes increased capacity as well as increased safety for people's traumas to come to deeper traumas to come to the surface and then be processed and digested and released from the system. So it's been incredibly powerful to witness in this group because we've been meeting. It's now the 4th time we're meeting this year, 2 times in person, twice online, and it'll continue for another year. Just to see the amount of capacity that has been generated, even from the last in person to this one, has been tremendous. So the kinds of trauma that we're able to process now and the kinds of transformation people are witnessing is just remarkable. And the way he's doing it, essentially, and the way we're doing it, is it's this concept of co-regulation. So the best example that I've heard him describe that really resonated for me was, imagine my son were to come to me and say, "Mommy, I'm really scared." And I were to say, "There's nothing to be scared of. You're good." What I've done there is discounted and dismissed his emotion. He hasn't stopped being scared. He just isn't going to tell me about it. Another way to respond would be to say, "I can feel how scared you are. Come here." And if he feels safe, he can come close and he can latch into my nervous system because it's more grounded, co-regulate, ground that energy. And then essentially we can have a rational conversation about whatever it is that he's scared of. So this is actually and this can happen with adults too. So the more we process our trauma and heal, the more grounded we become, the more our nervous system can either come to center or stay centered. So that when someone else gets activated, when their trauma is triggered and they move into fight or flight and their nervous system gets activated, often what happens is contagious. So mine will also get activated. But if I have the resources to ground or stay grounded, they can then co-regulate with me and ground that energy together. And then we can have a conversation about whatever and process whatever it is that's going on. And so essentially we talk about these concepts of resources. And the more resources there are, the more easy it is to ground the trauma and the energy, and to actually then that's considered healing. Now the difference here is it's not that I pick up your energy, or that's not what he's doing. What he talks about is, and I believe what's happening is that as you ground, and the trauma comes to the surface, I can feel what's resonant trauma in my system. So if there's any element of mine, and maybe it's much smaller, so I'm able to ground more easily, but if it's also a big trigger in my system, then it escalates and both of us are triggered. So that's one way to think about it. I'm not picking it up, resonant trauma in my system, then I'm able to ground and you can then co-regulate with me. The other way to think about it is that as I ground, as I heal and clear, my consciousness can expand, my awareness grows. So what I believe Thomas is able to do is, because he's so grounded, he's done so much work on self, he's able to co-regulate with up to 1,000 people. And he works with communities who are survivors of Holocaust, genocide, slavery, so collective trauma. Because he's so grounded, he can co-regulate with up to, let's say, 1,000 people. So they're all co-regulating with him. And then the people that have the most trauma, and will come to the mic. He'll keep it open-ended. They'll come to the mic. And we're doing things in triads as well. So we're processing with each other and we're practicing on our own outside of the session itself over the course of the week, every week with our triads and so on. So there's practice that's happening for each of us. So we're continuing to learn how to identify, become more self-aware, identify our patterns, heal and ground the trauma, and then help make a stronger healing current or become more of a resource in the space. So essentially, the people that come up to speak, you can see it on their faces. They have rage or sadness or fear from these traumas, and they'll share whatever it is that's coming up for them. And then within the span of a few minutes, he will ask them to tune into their bodies, and he can feel what they're feeling. So he'll describe it. Sometimes they'll say, "Yes, that's what I'm feeling." And they'll both go there. And then he's providing what he says now, and he's leveraging the collective. All of us are. The more we ground and heal, the more we can help create the safe container. So it's like the ecosystem. And so then that person now, because it's a safe space, the system is all of our systems know how to self-heal. They're incredibly powerful. So by creating, the safer the system is, the more healing capacity is enabled for the person to heal their own trauma. There's another way to look at it. So essentially then, he helps dissolve that sankara or melt those knots or remove the illusion, the blocks in our system, however you want to think of it, the maladaptive patterns. He dissolves it. And then inevitably what is people go from like rage, anger, fear to like joy, peace, happiness. And you can see it on their faces. They light up, they start laughing. They're like full of joy and happiness. And like, it's amazing to watch. And we're going to deeper, as I mentioned, deeper and deeper traumas this time. Anyway, so we've been doing this. And I started the first couple of days, I was feeling a lot, all this tension in my system like before, and I'm feeling cracks up my neck and so on as I'm releasing it. And with some people where I had resonant trauma, before it was like every person, I was like crying. This time it's like a couple of people, I feel movement of tears or emotion, and I'm moved to tears. So there's stronger resonant trauma. But I think because I've been clearing so much, the resonance is there, but it's smaller. So it doesn't necessarily overwhelm my system as much. Anyway, so I was noticing that the first couple of days. And then what ended up happening that was so powerful was, it was the second night. And during the day, I was explaining one of the patterns that I've discovered. And I think I've shared this in one of the videos, but my pattern is that I put people in positions of authority, like a parent. I'll do this with my boss, with my partner, with friends or family, whoever I like will default, put them in these positions of authority. And then I do everything to people please, to get their approval as a type 3. This is not uncommon. And so I'll do all these things to try to get, and I'll make assumptions about what they like or what they respect, and I'll try to do those things. Then when I don't get the validation I'm seeking, which is the drug that I've been so accustomed to and addicted to, either because I didn't do what they actually respected and valued, I made some assumption that was wrong, or that's not the thing that they do, I then feel really upset or sad, or sometimes I get angry and I'll rebel, and I'll do things that are then rebellion, and then I'll feel guilt and shame, and there's this ongoing cycle that goes on. So I've discovered this pattern with my husband, my business partner, with like family and so on, starting right from childhood. This is the pattern that I was seeing. I noticed this even in these triads that we create. One of the triads that I was in, I noticed that I was meeting with them and then someone had set up like stricter rules about making sure we're on time or giving longer notice or making sure we were booked for the rest of the year. And I felt like I suddenly put them in this, I didn't realize at first, but I put them in this authority position. And then I alternated between like there was the stress, am I going to be late? And I don't really feel like going now. And like this resistance to authority. And then I would rebel. I'd skip meetings sometimes, or I'd multitask when I was in meetings. And then it was my business partner that was like, what are you doing? Why are you even going? Why don't you just step out of this group? And initially I was like, no, I can't do that. I'm going to meet them in person or they're going to get really upset and I'm going to hurt the relationship and they'll be really mad at me. And all these thoughts came in. I finally decided I had cleared enough and I felt like I could take this step. I decided to do that. So I wrote a note and said, here's the pattern I've discovered and I've decided like I want to leave. And I sent an email. I couldn't even do it in person. And there was all this fear when I sent it. And then, of course, maybe no surprise, because the people here are just so conscious and so emotionally mature. They came back and they said, we totally understand what you're going through. I'm so sorry that you're like feeling like that. Like maybe we can meet in person when we get together for the session here. So we got together. This is on Tuesday. And I was sharing the reasons the pattern I discovered and what I was observing and then what I decided to do and so on. And I realized I disembodied. I was telling the narrative of the story, but I wasn't feeling anything like I did when I experienced it. And so one person similarly responded in the same kind of energy. Like I was disembodied, they felt disembodied. And so it kept me at that distance. And then the second person said, I understand a part of me wants to support your process and understand why you needed to do it. But another part of me felt like there was a depth of connection that we created and now you're leaving. And she started to cry and said, now we have to start over and find someone else and all the things that go with that and hoping that we're not sure if we're going to find someone with that level of depth of connection and so on. And then as I watched her in tears, it brought me back into my body and into my heart. And then I was like, oh man, I'm hurting her. And I was able to soften at that point. And then when she finished, I shared with her that it was so validating to get that kind of response. And I was so touched by it. And then I shared with them, and now that I've allowed myself to say no and to honor that part of me that needed to have that sense of autonomy and freedom and not being constrained or deferring to authority and so on, it's like I've let it go. If you're open to it, I would love to talk about rejoining the group. And one of the women said, wow, that's so brave of you to say it. And I kind of said it like a little bit nervously. And the other woman said, jokingly, you made your decision, now you're stuck with it. And we all started laughing. And they came in for hugs. And as they were hugging me, I was laughing. And I started crying / half laughing. And then I was sobbing altogether. And we were all just like hugging each other. It was just such a beautiful, intimate moment. And like realizing this is really powerful. And as I was walking back with them, it suddenly dawned on me this pattern, how I deferred. And then what really dawned on me then was I have this desire to be close, strong desire to be close to people. But I armor in groups and I distance because of fear of rejection, or what I discovered last time, that volcano I discovered last time, of shame and sadness and fear. And so I'm unable to get close, but I crave it. And then when I get close, like in this program, there's been a few people who I've gotten close to. Whenever they come close, then I don't want that. I get nervous, I get anxious, I push it away, I sabotage it. And I was telling them, I think I test relationships, like, or I do something. It's almost like sabotage. And I thought maybe I'm doing that here too. It's like I started feeling close to them and then I did this thing. It was almost like a sabotage of it. And they were like totally familiar with that pattern and what Thomas calls the repetitive compulsion, the repeating pattern. It keeps doing it, hoping that one day you will see the pattern and change it or release it from the system, see it with equanimity to sensation is really the path to enlightenment. And so I was sharing the same story with my roommate in the evening, and another friend had come in. So I was sharing the story with them and finished telling the story of this great realization I had. One of them said, like, where are you right now? And I said, I'm not in my body. Like I did that thing again. I disembodied, tell you the narrative of the experience instead of being in the experience. She said, so what's happening in your body? And then I tuned in. And what I felt was like what I described as like shock. Like it's almost like shock waves after an earthquake. Something like that, which is something I've never felt before, but this is what was coming to me. And then she said, the thing that's coming to me is the shock of punishment for not being compliant. And immediately the image that came to me was of being like beaten when I was little by my mom. And she was bipolar, so she would have these extreme emotions, and when she'd get really upset, and I never consciously remembered it. I had a couple of images of, like with my sister and my brother, just one image. I thought maybe it was a one-off, but suddenly I got that feeling, and like I just started to like crumble, and I was like, I have no ill will. I love my mom. But there was like this feeling that I had in my body, and I just started to crumble. And the two of them had shown me this earlier and said, can we do this? And they came over and sat next to me, both of them on each side of me, and they like pressed against my shoulders, their shoulders against mine. So they were both leaning on both sides, squished between them as a swaddle, almost like safety. They were doing that. And then my body, I let it soften, and then suddenly it started to shake like an earthquake. It felt like my body would violently shake rhythmically. It was releasing this trauma from the system. And suddenly I had this image of stepping out of the armor of a suit, an armored suit. And like I'd lost all structure. My body was like totally limp. And then I was like sitting there, and then suddenly like I started getting really hot and uncomfortable. And then one of them said, do you want some space? Do you want us to move? First I'm like, no. And then I'm like, yes. And then suddenly I got an image of sexual trauma when I was young. And again, I crumbled, and I spent just 2 hours probably like in tears and like a wreck, because my story, my narrative, my whole life was like, I've never had capital T trauma. I don't know why I was drawn to all these trauma healing methodologies, maybe to help other people or to save the world and all my hubris. And this kind of shattered that storyline and made me realize why I was so afraid of intimacy and why I craved it so much, and I was just starting to feel into that. But it was this really scary, and like I was unraveling. That's how it felt. And my roommate was so sweet, so tender. It was like right there for me and showing me friendship, what friendship is. And a couple of times I was like, I don't want to burden you like this too much. And she was like, this is what friendship is. I'm here for you, just like you're here for me. So there's no such thing. Like, lean on me. It was just so beautiful. Try to be centered here. And then the amazing thing was that night, 2 minutes later, then you just wipe my tears away. I had a session with this medium, and it's someone that I'd heard about and how incredibly accurate. And there's no website, there's no exchange of even he didn't know my name. I texted him and he would set up a session, and he did this reading. And in the reading, he shared things that I've seen and I've captured in these videos, but a lot of things that I've seen in the ayahuasca journeys and in Vipassana, and that have coming to me in these meditations and so on, that I think I've shared. I'm not sure how much of it was projected. Like, I want to believe it, and I see these amazing synchronicities happening and like how guided I am and so on. But it was so validating. It took me into total expansion, from deep contraction to extreme expansion. And so what he shared, I'm going to share in a nutshell, was essentially, he said, you're in the midst of a massive transformation. You're shifting 180 from doing one thing, and now you're doing something completely different, from physical to spiritual. And then you're going to be bridging these worlds. And he said that you're going to be starting a business, or you may have already started a business, but it's going to be in the space of personal development, well-being, psychology, and spiritual matters. And he said, you're going to discover something that's going to be trademarked. He said something like that, like something that's been hidden for centuries in the mystic traditions. And he said it's been hidden, and you're going to bring it to the surface. And he said that your intelligence and industriousness from your past life is going to be part of it, but now you're going to bring the spiritual gifts. And he said, divine feminine, I'm seeing. He said, motherhood in particular. And he said, do you have boys? And I said, yes, I have 2 boys. And he said that your legacy is actually going to be motherhood, but not just for your boys. What you're going to do for them and many others is actually, he said, at the level of humanity. Like, another, again, really surreal and shocking to hear, but he said, you're going to impact humanity, and people are close to you are going to come for the ride. It's going to be this incredible experience. And he said, he shared a couple of other specifics, like he'd seen my past in Chicago, and he thought I was a Gemini, which I am. And I didn't say a single word until the very end. And he said that I'm being guided by my holy guardian angel, which is the same as the higher self. And he suggested this book they were recommending called The Holy Daemon, which I told you need to check out. It's all about the holy guardian angels and the tradition of that. But he said that the divine beings are guiding you, so you're going to be successful at every step. What else? Oh, he said that the way that so there's little dominoes, they're called Scottish runes, and they have symbols on them, and it's like dominoes. And then he throws them out when you say when, and I think he either grabs them or throws them, or I'm not sure, something like that. But he said the way that they fell, he said he's never seen before. It's almost like perfectly aligned and perfectly balanced in pairs. And he said that it reminded him of fireweed, which is a plant in Alaska that emerges after a forest fire. It's the first plant that emerges after a forest fire. So where there's devastation and the land has been devalued, it brings new life, like anew. And he said, that's what you're going to do. You're going to bring, when humanity is at this place of devastation and becomes like devalued, you're going to bring new birth, a new life to it, and reclaim that which has been lost, or something like that, he shared. So I was just in total awe. And then I shared with him my journey. And one thing he said there that was also amazing was, he said, in your romantic relationship, the person who's with you, there's going to be so much proof in the pudding, they won't be able to deny what's happening. Is perfect coincidence to my husband, who's my perfect polar opposite and thinks I'm batshit crazy. So I just can't wait until that happens. It'll be really exciting. But so essentially, at the end, and then I shared with him, I'm like, you're not going to believe how much resonance there is to my journey. And I shared some of the things that have happened. He was like, oh my gosh. Like, it was validating for him too, to hear it as a medium. He's keeping me updated on what happens, and I'd love to stay connected. So I got off the call and I was so excited. And I called the woman that recommended it to me and I was telling her what happened. And then my business partner texted me and was wanting to hear what happened. And I was like, I don't even want to go to sleep. I'm so excited. And he picked up and he was like, it's not excitement. You just uncovered massive trauma, childhood trauma that you haven't processed yet. I think that there is some excitement, but underneath that is a anxiety and almost a fear of facing it and going into stillness. And then I paused and I tuned in, got quiet, and then I felt foreboding and dread in my second and third chakra, my solar plexus in my belly. And it was like fear. I felt great fear and terror. And I was like, oh my God, I don't know that I want to sleep. I'm worried about what I'm going to see or what nightmares are going to come up. And I did go to sleep. And as I was falling asleep, my stomach was convulsing. And I think it was more release of the trauma. And then it would wake me up, and then again, it would convulse as I was falling asleep. And then after 3 or 4 rounds, I was able to sleep. I slept poorly. I got up early. I went to Qigong. I got up at 5:30, went at 6:30, didn't have enough sleep, was really tired, but was so exhilarated by what I'd heard from the medium that I just wanted to see if maybe Qigong was something I needed to explore. And then what happened was when I came into the hall then, and I saw someone that I know really well, and I was telling her what had happened and what I discovered, and she was like, where is space for you to process this? It sounds like you're doing a lot of stuff. I'm like, I know. And then she was like, she just made direct eye contact with me so that it stilled me. And then she's like, you want to take my hand? And she just offered it. And as soon as I took it, I started to feel it and crumble. And then I gave her a hug and I started sobbing. And then every person that would come to check on me, and there were so many incredible people that are here that are just have so much capacity and so much beauty to hold. It felt safe, and I was like sharing it with all these people. And by the end of the day, though, I was like totally unraveled. I felt like a snail without its shell, like exposed and vulnerable. And like my body was so tired. I felt like my will was broken. That's how I felt. I didn't have my drive. And I went to the tea room, which is a place where they have therapists to help you process anything that comes up. And I went to the, and I was able to completely let go and not feel like I was a burden on these people who were approaching me to see how I was doing. And I was able to completely break down. And then after 10 minutes of just sobbing and sobbing, oceans of tears, I leaned back in my chair and I came to this place of ease and peace. And the therapist, the woman, she was like, I can feel your capacity, your strength. And the fact that it came up at this time, your system knew there's an intelligence that you had the capacity, and you were in an environment that could support this level of trauma coming to the surface. And I suddenly felt this fierce protectiveness of that little girl. What I need is obviously not out there. I had this image of cradling her. And that's what I'd wanted all day. I just wanted to be cradled and held. And I was able to do that for myself. Now I could see my adult self cradling this little girl. And I slept, and I got up, and in the morning I thought, I feel okay. Like, let's see I'm sure it'll be waves that continue to come through. So I went into the hall for the session, and then I started with the meditation, and it continued after that. I went into this incredibly deep state of relaxation, like peace, unlike I've ever experienced before. It was like I was in a different realm or a different dimension, and I felt like it was like I was in an ocean, maybe the womb, but it was like an ocean. My body felt like that. So even as my fascia was unwinding or releasing, it was really gentle. And even when I moved my body or my hands, it felt like when you're in water and you can only move really slowly in the water. That's how I was moving. And when he would do the Q&A, instead of lots of cracks and tightness and movement and all that, I would just feel a gentle thread of a movement of their trauma. And then I would feel a really gentle release in the back of my neck or in my body somewhere that was like the resonance, but it was like, and then every so often I'd be moving really gently. And every so often my awareness would come to the center channel, and it would like almost rise the channel and end up between my eyes. I would go to this place of such deep stillness that I didn't even want to breathe. It was so powerful and so still, almost like I was touching source energy. And then I would see this light. And over the course of the day, I just kept meditating the entire day, like in this deep, peaceful place. And the message that came to me was, my whole life had been like running 100 miles a minute. Like I talk fast, I move fast, I do 100 things, I have a million activities. And I realized that was an intelligence. It kept me from, I wasn't ready. I didn't have the capacity or the environment to handle that level of trauma. So it did an intelligent response. It kept me really moving and busy. But now that I'd cleared some of it, I had the capacity to hold stillness. So now I was able to experience deeper states of stillness. And so that was the next day. And then this was now yesterday, I felt like I got up. I didn't feel that deep stillness, but it was some new baseline. And what started happening was the left side of my body, I started feeling get more rigid, and my legs started to hurt. My knees started to lock. I was limping then. I couldn't sit Indian style. What the hell? Left side is feminine. And in the evening, so this was progressively getting worse through the day. In the evening, then, in the middle of, or in the early evening, in the middle of one of the lectures that he was doing, I suddenly had this violent cough attack. So much so that I like peed my pants. It was like that violent and intense. And I like literally had to leave, go back to my room and change. And I kept coughing and I'm like, what the hell is going on? And I went to sleep then with all of this left side pain and these cough attacks. And then through the night, I felt releases happening. And then I got these messages that said that I had suppressed the feminine because of what happened, the trauma, the physical and sexual trauma. And so the left side is the feminine. Now that I've released some of that trauma, the feminine it's like detox. It's really leaving the system, the trauma that suppressed the feminine, it's leaving the system. And I suppress my voice. And so now it's opening. I'm having these cough attacks. I'm releasing from the fifth chakra, which is your voice or your truth. It's opening. So then I was like, of course. And then I was feeling much less today on the left side. And I didn't have as much of the release from the throat. So it's just been this incredible, and now there's little bubbles that come up. One woman that Thomas was working with today had childhood trauma when she was 5. And then as she was sharing and moving into it, I suddenly felt like it was like a bubble of grief. My whole body started shaking, and then I just started sobbing. I was doing it silently, luckily, but I was sobbing, and it was like, and then it came back to a place of peace and joy. And even today, like I was feeling so much joy, and I was seeing beauty in everything. And in people, I would just see their gifts and their beauty and be in awe. And that's what I moved to, awe and gratitude and humility at the intelligence of the system and the collective system and the ability to heal in collective and to move through really traumatic experiences and to find peace on the other side and happiness and beauty and joy. Just the beauty of going into the contraction and experiencing the expansion. All of these lessons and learnings, just incredible. It's just phenomenal. And so maybe I'll just leave it there. Thank you for joining me on the journey. What's coming up next? I'm going to Peru for 8 journeys, ayahuasca journeys, in 15 days in the jungles of Peru with 4 shamans. Starting December, I leave on the 4th and I come back on December 20th. And let's see what happens, man. All right, thanks for joining.